Hello, thank you for having me here. What I'm going to show today, I'm going to introduce you to my art. Actually, it's the first time I'm showing it publicly, so it's a big deal for me. But I'll start just to give you context, my background. As an Israeli, you start in the army, and that's where I got exposed to computers. And basically, after being a paratrooper for 2.5 years, I got injured. I actually volunteered and learned about simulations, 3D simulations. Finishing the army, I went to study art, traditional art. And while being a student, I started founding software companies. And for 18 years, I created all sorts of software companies specializing in 3D computer graphics for computer games, TV, etc. I was lucky enough to merge my company a year and a half ago and clean the table. And since last September, I'm only focusing on my art, which this is what I'm going to show you today. But it took me 9 years to get to this point. After Wall Street crash in 2001 and the Twin Towers, etc., I felt that in order to keep whatever is left from my sanity, I have to sort of, do art. And so I divided 10–20% of my time to start to write those physical 3D engines in order to enable me one day to create sculptures. So what I'm going to show you today, it's basically all sorts of simulations, catastrophes, based on proprietary physical 3D simulations. And then I'm basically taking this epic moment, this critical moment of the event, and I'm using 3D rapid prototyping to actually fabricate it into 3D sculptures. So what you're going to see first is a series that I call collisions. And basically, what you're watching now are collisions of two trucks that are colliding into one another. And the physical accuracy, the way that the metal sort of squash, the speed, the trajectory, it's all accurately correct, but I kept it sort of very minimalistic. So this is one scenario, the two trucks. The second one is, okay, I'll reveal the sculpture. So I brought over here two sculptures. Normally there are 2 meters, 1.5 meters, 3 meters. Obviously, technically, I was able to bring just a small one. So what you see here is one of this particular scene that you've seen right now. And I made it sort of like luxury goods, seductive, because, quicker, faster, etc. The second, some frames that you can see close-ups of the sculptures here. I create them in different variations and plating. So this one is another simulation where you see a car sort of hitting a truck, or the truck hits the car, and that would be the next sculpture that I brought. Now, I've been collaborating and working very close to different 3D printing companies. In this case, I'm working very close with a company named Object, and they're enabling me to print in extremely high resolution, very, very detailed objects. The process that I've created, that from the time I write the code and I collaborate with all sorts of experts, until the final sculpture, there is no human intervention. Literally, nobody touched it. And so I'm, in a way, kind of playing a mini god, where I'm creating these environmental situations. Here is two trucks hitting one another. And this sculpture is pretty big. Each sort of truck is 1.5 meters. Normally, in this technology, you can only print up to 50 centimeters. So they're doing it in chunks. Now, in this scene, what you're seeing is also almost like committing suicide. And so the sculpture it has this red Ferrari color. And my aim is really to sort of take the moment, the motion, and sort of embed it within the sculpture, which is something that I don't think haven't been done yet in sculptures. Doing sculpture is a very slow process, right? So how can you sculpt an accident? Because I do 3D physical simulations, the data is actually, embedded in the sculpture because it's being printed. I literally take a frame, a 3D frame, and print it into physical sculptures. So the art actually is a sort of a dialogue between the object and the simulation. The next engine and the next series is about fluids. And my approach to every series is kind of the same. It's very tedious, takes a long time to write it, but then I have rules, aesthetic rules, and also rules that objects sort of collide walls, they collide one another. In this case, the liquid's the same. They collide one another, they collide different objects. And those environmental situations enable me then to sort of pick the particular moment that I'm interested in. So here is two splashes kind of hitting one another. In this case, I'm using oil. And for me, there's a lot of references. Why oil? Why pollution? My references are kind of, or my inspiration is daily news. But as you can see here, the sculpture, it's over 2 meters. And this is kind of the moment that the two splashes kind of collide and hit one another. Here are some shots from the studio. The coloring process is very much like you find in the production of cars, the way that manufacturers and color cars. The next one is oil splash. Sort of, it's a suspension of an oil splash. As I said, my aim is to take those in sometimes horrific situations or catastrophic situations, but get to a point where it's beautiful, it's sublime, and aesthetically sort of reveal it. So this is an oil splash. So the simulation shows where the splash collides, and this is how the splash happens, and freezing it. This is another splash here that hits a column. And obviously my aim many times is to make it, 5, 6, 7 meters. I think the physical impact is extremely important. If it's huge, I think it's going to be visually much more appealing, although sometimes it makes a lot of sense to make them small. This is another splash hitting a cube. So the consistency here is that whatever the series that I'm working on, I follow the same rules that I've defined. So I believe that simulations have a sensibility of their own. We're talking about sims and games. This is my background. I've been developing technologies for that. And by creating those simulations and actually interfering with the code, as I said, I'm almost like a mini god. And I immerse myself within those simulations, within those traumatic events, and sort of I can control them in real time. But I won't interfere with the physical rules. I have a lot of parameters that I can control, but I won't interfere. In this case, I've been possessed and obsessive about waves. I used to surf all my life. And I created Tsunami. Now, I started working it a year and a half before the Japan tsunami, and the sculpture arrived 2 weeks before the real tsunami in Japan. And I made it black because, as I said, I'm looking at oil and I'm looking at pollution, all sorts of things. And when it arrived, and then 2 weeks after the Japanese tsunami happened, it was like I freaked out because it was so similar to this black liquid, horrific event. And the thing about it is that up to now, sublime is a subject that many artists dealt with in the history of art. However, you cannot really create a sculpture of a wave or a painting of a wave. It's retro, right? You can think how it was. You can take a video or a photo. But because I do physical simulations, then I can basically sort of capture the moment into the sculpture. I worked very hard to make the output of the sculptures to being extremely similar to what you see on the screen. This gap between physical objects and virtual objects, it's a challenge, and it took me a long time to get to a point where aesthetically they don't fall, the physical object won't fall. This is a waterfall, which normally it's a source of life, it's water, but in this case it's a crash, it's a collapse. And so the sculpture is around 1.5 meters on a meter. I really want to bring it over, but was too complicated to ship it in the time frame. What you'll see in a second is a close-up where you'll see the details. And as I said before, you can literally sense the movement, the energy. So this is a flood. I was invited to a gallery that I'm going to present soon, and I wanted to do a site-specific thing. So I asked them to give me the architectural plan of the gallery, and I created this scenario. So there's the main gallery, which is over 100 meters on kind of 7-meter high or 8-meter high. Then you have stairs and you have an upper gallery. So what I've created is a whole scenario where I'm basically flooding the gallery and creating sort of a site-specific catastrophe. And you know, one way to sort of present it is almost like augmented reality, where it's sort of a video matching between the real video footage of the gallery and the 3D simulations. So, you know, beauty is something which we find many times in really weird places, like, you know, flowers are beautiful, but I think also that, unfortunately, when I'm looking at, for example, a tsunami or an explosion or a car accident, almost like, and this is what they wrote in the Wired article of this month, they said I'm like a serial killer in a way that I don't look at that and trying to get emotional and show you the blood and the pain. No, there's no emotion. I'm looking at it from an aesthetical point of view, from sort of a situation that, you know, it's horrific many times, but can be, on the other hand, beautiful. This is a different technology, a different engine that I've worked on for a long time. And this is disintegration. So you've seen the collisions, you've seen the liquids, now it's disintegrated objects. And again, very sort of precise research where I'm taking cubes. First one is exploding from it get hit from the outside in. The second one is from the inside out. The third one is a collapse. The fourth one is sort of like explosion that takes the roof off. And then I started sort of examining and focusing on each one. And for, I would say, 5 years, I dealt with a small problem, which is gravity. Very hard to solve. And I tried all sorts of things, you know, how do I sort of deal with this disintegrated debris up in the air? And I've tried all sorts of things, but I wasn't happy with anything. So eventually I developed this solution where I have disintegrated objects. I sort of slice them like a CT scan, and every layer I print on glass. So imagine that I take this sphere exploding, and I'm chopping it, cutting it, slicing it, say, to 20 layers, and every layer I'm rendering from 2 sides and printing on a glass. So eventually you have like 40 layers of glass, so you can see it in the front, you can turn around, you can see it from the back, and it's almost like a 3D deep image, if you will. In a minute, I'll show you an example so you can see that. So those are the spheres sort of exploding streets. This is the research I've done on a street sort of exploding, and this sort of epic moment. And again, the way it is, it's on glass layers. So using the same technology, in this case, what I'm doing is breaking an object. And the sculpture is this moment before the object completely collapses. It's sort of this tangible, almost sad moment before the object completely loses its shape. So that's the simulation. And the sculpture is the moment before it sort of crashes, collapses. And this is a cube that I explode the hell out of it. Next series is a different technology, which is gas. What you're watching here is atomic explosion, which is extremely, extremely, extremely detailed. It took me forever to process that and develop that. Yeah, you can all look at it and say, where is the inspiration? I think what I'm doing, it's global. It's completely global, right? We all notice accidents. We all hear about the atomic fear, etc. And but unfortunately or fortunately, that's the subject matter that I'm obsessed with. So this atomic explosion, here is the layers that I explained you, the glass layers. So it's a frame, and now I'm turning the camera and you can see the layers of the glass. So you can basically see it from multiple angles. This is after the volcano eruption. This is sort of a very huge condensed smoke. So sort of I feel comfortable, I guess, in the two sides of my brain. I grew up for years developing software, designing software, zooming into code and mathematics and physics. But my being is visual. I create, I design, and you know, this is basically what my palette is sort of using this you know, the processes of writing software, but implementing into art, really. So this is a front view of the cloud, the huge smoke cloud that you've seen. Okay, so now for something which is less traumatic. You know, this moment where you look at something and you are like, you know, you want to suspend it. So I was dealing with levitation, this gentle moment where you don't know if it's flying or falling. So I was doing fabric simulation, right? And I wanted it to be in the air. I told you, gravity is a problem that I'm dealing with for a long time. So I was looking for a solution. How can I basically keep it in the air? And I found this amazing group in Europe that they are experts in magnets. And they were able to provide me, to sell me, a magnet that actually can levitate the object, something like 10 centimeters in the air. So what you're watching now basically is this. I really want to bring it over, but hopefully next time. But it's levitated. It's really up in the air. Here is just a quick simulation I've done for myself. The reason it's changing colors, it's for me to actually pick the right color that I want it to be plated. It's sort of kind of internal research that I've done to help me figure out what I want. So eventually it's being frozen, right? It's a frame that is being frozen in the air. The background is just a placeholder. It's to check the space, etc. So as David said, I'm like obsessive with details, and I looked at post-traumatic events, right, debris, and in this case you can see some photos, and I started doing sculptures that try to mimic the debris, you know, what's happening in the post-event, and as you can see, those are pretty intricate objects. And the way I achieve that is based on some noise generation. This is almost like a control chaos object. So in this case, it's just showing a quick example of how basically the noise volumes, kind of waves, are changing the ground, just to and this is how I basically achieve. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show before they kick me off the stage is something that actually I'm working on right now, I mean, for the last year. And it's coming. It's basically, I said, instead of using physical rules of waves or explosions, etc., or accidents, why won't I take sound waves and let them deform the sculpture when a sound wave hits something? How can you visualize sound? And so, can you bring the volume up?
You hold it on. You see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all. So don't worry, okay? Okay.
So in essence, the sound is almost like restructuring and more, changing the shape, like almost modern cubism. And I took this voice from Tom York, Uncle song, and it's coming from a movie, Jacob's Ladder. So here are the more advanced sculptures.
And you hold it on. You see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. Freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all. So don't worry, okay? Okay. Relax.
So this is what I do, and thank you for listening. It's, it's all out physically. Thank you.